WoofDen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Bill WoofDriver Helman.
And I am Andrew Hager. Welcome to the WoofDen.
We're here today to do another wonderful podcast.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it. When we talked last week, Bill, we were talking about your dogs, obviously, because that's your whole life. Your whole lifestyle revolves around your dogs. But in the last week, you've had something major that's happened, and I think it would be good for our listeners if you talked about that a little bit.
Yes. Unfortunately, I had to say goodbye to my oldest Husky currently, and the only female I ever had. Her name is Princess. So she's better than 15 years old, and kept her as healthy as we can. And I think she had good genes from where she came from to begin with. But because of a lot of veterinarian, care or monitoring, I was able to give her supplements and medicines. We noticed deficiencies, and as older dogs, and people get them, thyroid and high blood pressure, etc. So I gave her all the medicines I could to keep her going as much as possible. But recently, and she would go with us on my dog adventures, she would actually be able to do almost a whole dog adventure. We would run it at a slower pace for her. On the longer dog adventures, when we were on a bike, she would usually max out somewhere between 3 to 5 miles. Those adventures go as many as, they could go 15 to 20 miles sometimes. But she actually, the past few weeks, she got almost 7 miles, which I was really surprised. I mean, she just showed so much fire. And that's one thing about her, and I think that also gave her longevity, is her dominant behavior or dominant nature. She was very much being the boss, and most Huskies are like that. They want it to be their idea, but she was just alpha.
Yeah, I remember you saying she was sort of the alpha in your group.
Yes, totally. So I think that kept her her footing on the ground and gave her the stability and helped with longevity. But she had developed, I noticed the past few days, I think it started actually Monday, she couldn't even get up. And sometimes she struggled to get up, and sometimes that was just because she worked out the day before. Of course, it had to definitely do with her arthritis and stiffness as health issues progress. But this time she totally couldn't get up. Once in a great while she exhibited that kind of behavior, and that wasn't age-related. That originally, when she did that, was some other issue. We weren't sure what it was from, but it usually repaired itself within 2 days. This was a little different in the sense that her legs were shaking, her back legs, and when I was able to get her up, she was wobbly and not mobile. So I contacted the vet and took her over for an examination. We thought originally it was a back-related issue. So the veterinarian wanted me to see, and I know they have specialists for all different, aspects of the dog body, like a human, and they actually have a neurologist for dogs. So I went to see the neurologist, and that's over in Annapolis, Maryland, and for those of you that don't know, we're in Baltimore, the Baltimore region. So
like 40-minute drive.
40-minute drive, exactly. Yeah. And this is, I equate it to, it's certainly not as big. I'm familiar because we're in Maryland with Hopkins, which is a world-renowned hospital for those who don't know. And Hopkins, this is like the Hopkins in veterinarian medicine, at least that I've seen. I mean, just you go in there, and there's cardiology and there's neurology and almost anything you can think of, ophthalmology, whatever it is. So I mean, it's truly, they do cataract. I know this because I've done cataract surgery on my dog. So
wow. Okay, well, we'll have to talk about that in a minute. But
so we took her to the neurologist, and as I got there, my regular veterinarian, he called me and said, "Listen, we just got her blood work back, and I see some things that show she's anemic, so she's probably losing blood somewhere, and some other red flags with her blood. So please, before they do, we were going to perform an MRI. Before they do that, ask them their opinion, probably give her some x-rays or, a sonogram, ultrasound, whatever they call it." So when I finally met the veterinarian over at the specialty place, the neurology veterinarian, she saw that and said the same thing, and they did the ultrasound, I believe it was, and they called me and said they had found a large mass tumor and they named what kind of tumor it was, and I can't think of that name for the life of me, but it was some scientific name. And we consulted my regular veterinarian. I asked them to do that. And the determination was that this tumor is very, if that's what they think it is, which they're pretty sure, is very aggressive and
it's not benign.
It's not benign, very deadly. And not only was it operable, but not only was it there, it looked like it was in other parts of the liver. But the biggest factor of this whole issue is she was not bleeding. I'm not trying to be too much information here, but she was not bleeding into the stomach, which means the blood was probably not being produced properly. And I'm just giving you layman terms here.
Yeah.
So that means it's probably affecting the bone marrow, which means it's probably throughout the body, the cancer. This cancer can develop, according to what I've learned, in a matter of a few months, and it's not that uncommon in older dogs. So the recommendation was to let her go and let her cross Rainbow Bridge. So that was after consulting with the veterinarians and, of course, talking with my wife and my knowledge. We thought that was best for Princess, so we had to say goodbye to her.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bill.
I appreciate it.
You've had her since she was a puppy, right?
No, actually, I had her since she was 4 years old because the family that had her, she was from, I believe, Connecticut, actually. The family that had her had to rehome her because I think somebody was getting sick in the family.
Okay.
Or the kids were
Someone
out of
had an allergy?
Yeah, or the kids were getting out of school. I mean, when I I understand sometimes it happens. You have to rehome a pet, but they, for whatever reason, they had to. They actually bred her, which I didn't. I mean, I found out when they told me, and she had more litters than she probably should have had. They were doing it as a family, I guess, experience. So they wanted to breed her and sell the puppies or give the puppies away.
Your kids learn the meaning of, or the miracle of life, and then you make a few $100.
Exactly. But she was overbred, and they told me this because they couldn't keep her away from the male that they had, and they had them as a pair for this purpose, and they wanted them to always be together, but they kept impregnating her. So they had to. I told them before she would come here. She was 4 at the time. I needed her to be spayed because I didn't want a dog that's not spayed or neutered almost always has a different personality. And I was bringing Princess into a household with 2 other males that were fixed.
Yes.
So, and Huskies are a breed that tends to almost a lot of dogs will roam, or at least they tend to roam, meaning leave your yard looking for a mate if they're not spayed or fixed. Mm-hmm. So plus they can be a little more aggressive. So I wanted to take that edge off of her, and I wanted to make sure it never happened again, because if she was overbred, I didn't want to be possibly affect her health from it.
Yes. I mean, do you think that her not being spayed when she was younger, do you think that might have affected how she eventually became the alpha in the...
From what I understand and my knowledge with dogs, that females that have puppies become a little more protective or a little more assertive. Mm-hmm. She probably always had that dominant nature anyway, but a friend once told me that sometimes German Shepherds, which a lot they use for protection work, the females that they'll let them have some puppies, because one of the reasons it does make them better police dogs, because they get that motherly, that protection instinct to them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which it brings it out a little more. I mean, it's naturally there anyway.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it is interesting. So she definitely had that, and when she met the puppies, because when my other Huskies crossed Rainbow Bridge, I had Princess. So when they did, I wanted to have more Huskies, so I got puppies then. And she was with the puppies, and it was a really interesting dynamic because they weren't hers. Obviously, she knew that, but she still wanted to mother them. So it was kind of interesting and fun to see that dynamic.
Yeah, so she became almost like a surrogate mother or a stepmother for these puppies.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, this is a really good segment we're going over. When I had an older Husky at the time, and I had Princess, and I had 2 puppy Huskies, and I was training them all to be off leash to do activities that I do, and I was with my master trainer who was teaching me, and he was saying, look at this dynamic. They think they're the parents of the puppies because he had one of his police dog, protection dog, German Shepherds. And he said, I'm going to watch Princess and your older male around my dog because they might actually try to defend the puppies and it could be a confrontation. And they were kind of getting around the puppies and moving in a certain way. So even the male somewhat, but the female Princess, being Princess, was definitely showing those signs. So it was interesting to watch the dynamic there too, and for me to learn, and I love sharing that because people out there who have older dogs and might get puppies, they might get some of that parental instinct from the dogs.
Now, Princess wasn't your first dog. Who was your first dog?
My first dog was Czar, and that's the older male I talk about in this scenario. So Czar I got when he was a puppy back in 1995, and he was he taught me everything I know, I like to say, because I got him and I had no idea what I was getting into, basically. The reason I got him is because when I was a young boy, my sister had a boyfriend who became her husband, and his family had a husky named Nanook. And I would go to my sister's in-laws or her husband's family's house, and Nanook was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. He would jump all over me, and he was just so much energy and so playful, and he looked like a wolf to me. And I said, oh my God, I love this dog. So that was my first inspiration to have a husky.
It was nostalgia.
It was nostalgia, exactly. I said I always want one, but I didn't have any area. Because usually, I mean, there's some people that successfully keep huskies in apartments and smaller, I guess, houses without yards. It's more challenging. Finally, when I moved to a house, I said, I've got the room, I want a husky.
Yeah.
So I got Czar.
Yeah, I haven't seen any huskies on like tiny houses on HGTV. You know, I don't know if that would work.
Yeah, it'd be a far stretch.
Okay, so you got Czar, and then and you say he taught you everything you know. Like how so?
Well, I was pretty, like I like to say, green. I just I got him, and I knew really nothing about dogs. So not only was any dog going to be challenging, but when you go to a breed like a husky that's very, now I know this, prey-driven and very active, you find out what it's all about not to, because at first I was just treating him like a puppy, giving him lots of love and playing with him and thinking, oh yeah, he'll be done and he'll want to go and relax or do something. And relax wasn't really in his vocabulary. It was just like all or nothing. They play, and a lot of puppies do this. They play really hard and then they drop dead. And they drop dead in the sense they're tired.
Yeah, they just pass
sleep
out.
Really hard. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So he did this. Finally, I mean, I did this with him. I would play with him, but I had to play hard to get him to want to sleep, to get his tiredness, to get it, I guess, air out a little bit of his energy. And that became, as he got a little older, as Czar got even more stamina and endurance because he was aging and he didn't eat all the rest, it became a little more challenging to me. And he wasn't the kind of dog you could just leave at home. You had to do something with him.
What was going to happen if you left him at home?
Well, he ate a wall.
He ate a wall?
He actually, and I wasn't even left him alone. I mean, I was fortunate enough, I had my own business at the time, and I was able to take him with me every day. And I took him with me, and he stayed in my office. He could walk all over. We had just basic, regular offices. But I think I went out to maybe meet somebody, and one of my coworkers came to me, or one of the people that worked for me, and said, I think the dog ate the wall. We tried to stop him. I'm like, what do you mean? And I looked over there, all those drywalls on the ground. I'm like, why didn't you call me? But yeah, he was felt, I guess, you could say separation anxiety.
Yeah.
It was just more that he was bored.
Yeah, I've heard that. When I went to get Sammy at guide dog school, they said a lot of chewing is boredom related.
Yes. Yes.
And it's amazing what dogs can actually chew through. Like we have these leather leashes, but the dog could just like bite that in half if he really felt like it.
If they felt like it, yeah, they can do a lot of damage. I mean, you wouldn't even think he'd be able to grip like a wall would be attractive to him because there's nothing to chew on. But I mean, he just sunk his tooth into it.
Yeah, he managed to get a little scrape there, and then all of a sudden you get more purchase, and you can just tear the wall down.
Exactly. My the whole saving grace and I guess the dawning of my life with dogs was when, because I was in the pet business at the time, and what I mean by that was we kind of designed some niche pet products, and we would sell them at pet trade shows to pet stores. And I was at one of these pet trade shows, and I would walk around and see other products because almost all the major manufacturers in the world exhibited there. And somebody had an attachment for a bicycle to safely be able to put your dog on the side of a bike and ride with them. And I'm like, I was thinking about that. Huskies like to run. Maybe that's something cool I could try. And because we were at a trade show, they were looking. They didn't bring merchandise to really sell, but at the end of the show, they don't want to haul it back, so they'll sell their merchandise. And they sold it to me relatively inexpensively, and that opened up everything to me because I put that into effect. I installed it on my bike, and I took Czar out for a mile run in my neighborhood, and that dog was the happiest dog I've ever seen in my life. I come home, and he just went right to sleep. And he was like, you could talk to him. He was controllable. He was like, okay, hey, that was fun. And I'm like, geez, that was nothing for me to pedal a mile. If you wanted me to run a mile, that might be a different story.
Yeah.
Back then, maybe I could have done it, but today might be a different story. That opened my eyes to everything. It was one of the most incredible experiences of my, or at least learning experiences of my life.
Yeah. Now, how does a device like that hook onto a bicycle?
It actually, it's really cool because I would have never thought about this, but it goes under your seat is the best way to attach it because, of course, it puts your whole body, because you're sitting down, the weight over it. So if the dog would actually lunge, if it would see a squirrel or it would just say, I don't want to do this anymore, it won't pull you over.
Yeah.
It's your weight's concentrated over the seat where it mounts to, and it's got a big spring on it. So the dog learns it. It's got a short tether and a big spring, so the dog can pull on it some and learn that, oh, I'm only going to get so far away from this. And I thought the dog would be intimidated by the bicycle wheels.
Yeah.
But once you start going, he just starts running. And when he sees that I don't have to touch these wheels, they feel pretty comfortable with it pretty quickly.
Yeah, because you would think the spinning of the spokes.
Yeah, and it makes a little sound. I mean, it's not like a motor.
Yeah,
but yeah,
they like, they've got their tail in there or something. It'd be really damaging.
God forbid. But yeah, they're pretty smart about avoiding. They take the path of least resistance, and it's easier to go straight and not try to cross behind or in front of the wheel. So they just go alongside of it and not intimidate it. We know that if we put our hand or a tail gets caught in there, it's gonna do some damage.
Yeah,
but they're just cool, so it's not bothering me.
Okay, well that's
it was pretty a cinch to train.
Yeah, and I got to say, when I first heard about you and the fact that you were like taking dogs out attached to your bike, my first thought was when I was at guide dog school, we were out training one day and there was actually an accident where somebody had two German Shepherds, and I guess they were just holding on to the leash while they were riding the bike, and the dogs pulled them out in front of a car, and the dog got hit by a car. And I remember our trainer taking us aside, and like obviously that's a horrific thing, but he said, well, this is an example of somebody who's not in control of their dog. You
Yes.
can't be in control of your dog like that, and when you're not in control of your dog, that's when bad things happen. And so when I heard like, okay, there's this guy Bill, he's the WoofDriver, he rides around with these dogs on his bike, I was thinking like, well, that doesn't sound safe. But yeah, if there's this special mechanism with this spring and the dogs are kept at a certain distance and the weight is distributed in a certain way, you're never not in control of your bike.
You're never not in control of the bike. And I can't tell you how many times people have said what you said with valid concern. Like, how do you do this and why and what happens if the dog sees something? How's it lunge? How do you control it? But I see a lot of people on the trail. No, I'm not going to say a lot, but I've seen some people on the trail trying to ride their dog on the bike with a leash and in their hand. Now, that is totally unsafe because you cannot control the dog at all, and the dog's going to pull the bike over. You're going to try to grab it, and you're going to have a major catastrophe. So anytime I see someone doing that, I try to mention to them there's a much better way to do it, and it's relatively inexpensive. Once you buy it, you don't need to keep buying it.
It's good forever.
It can move from bike to bike to bike. So if maybe you have a partner, a wife, a friend, whatever that you want to share it with, you can actually mount the stems to the bike and move this device from bike to bike or stem to stem.
Okay. Yeah, that's just one of those things. Yeah, like people don't even know how to walk their dog properly on a leash. A lot of people, they let the dog get way out in front and pull
so
down.
True. And a Husky is a challenging breed to walk because they're natural born pullers. So when you put a Husky on a leash, it wants to pull you. There's a way to correct that, But the problem is, if you take that pulling instinct or discourage it, then you're probably not going to be able to do the activities, at least that I do.
Yeah.
So you gotta decide what you're training to do and what your goals are.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people don't give that any consideration. They'll just buy one of those Flexi leashes that goes out 20 feet.
Yes.
And you're not controlling your dog then.
You're not. And most park laws are usually 4 to 6 foot leashes too, because they get too far away from you, and the dogs can mingle with people or other dogs and create a problem.
Well, and they'll just break that thing. You get a dog like a Husky or like a larger breed dog, that little Flexi leash will just snap when they get out.
I know somebody that happened to, Danny, who sometimes, and I think you know him, who sometimes accompanies us. He swore he'll never get another Flexi because the dog just tore it off. He's got a big dog.
I think we just lost an endorsement. Flexi's never going to advertise on this podcast.
I apologize. Actually, though, for my purposes, the Flexi is a good training tool. And because I do try to teach the dogs some leash etiquette. And the Flexi gives you the ability to have different lengths at different times when I'm training them. So I actually do like it. I've never had an experience of even my Huskies. Now, again, I have them under control because I've trained them, but I've never had the experience of them coming close to breaking it. But
you also don't let them go out 20 feet.
Yeah. Well, I do actually at certain times
when
I'm training them to do certain things. Yes. I want them to get far away from me. And something like training them on an invisible fence, you want the dog to approach the fence and know the barrier, and you want to make sure it wasn't your idea that the dog would go into the signal field, but they have to be tempted to go to it and retreat from it naturally. So a long Flexi is a great idea because you could be further away from him.
So you use the Flexi in conjunction with the invisible fence.
Yes, to train.
To train.
So the Flexi really has a lot of training purposes and can have its place in society.
If you know how to use it.
If you know how to use it. Yeah.
Well,
you just put your dog and you're going to be willy-nilly, forget about it. But that's with a lot of products.
I wonder if I remember with the invisible fences, there was some lady, I used to work at Petco, and this lady came in, she had Borzois, and she was saying that, the invisible fence was no good because the dog figured out, it'll shock me for about 2 seconds, and then I'll be on the other side of it, and I can run fast enough that it won't matter.
I'm not endorsing invisible fence, but it's one of the greatest tools I found, besides that Springer bike detachment. People that say that just have... And I'm not trying to offend anyone here, but they just have no idea how an invisible fence works because I used them on my Huskies with about 99.9% accuracy or at least containment. And I know, it's not, without 100%, sometimes people might feel insecure somewhat because if the dog gets out one time, it could get hit or you could lose a dog. Yeah. I did have a dog get out once or twice. Most of the time, it's because of operator error. A battery's low in the collar. You just got to make sure to regularly change them. Or some other extenuating circumstance. We had a Thunder event, and I didn't know one of my dogs, Czar actually, was he developed, and I've had this happen in older dogs, developed a phobia of thunder.
Sammy doesn't like it.
Yeah, he took off. So, certain precautions you have to understand. So I actually needed to put him in the house when there was a thunderstorm. But he took off, and he did actually make it through the fence. Now, but I've worked with, I know the local branch, Invisible Fence is a franchise, and I know the local franchise owner, and I've learned a lot of what they do because they can train almost any dog to cooperate with an invisible fence. And she said for 2 seconds, you can make that signal field as big as you want. You can make it last for, I think, 10 or 20 feet on each side of it. So, I mean, it takes away a lot of your...
40 feet.
40 feet, yeah. It's at least 20 feet, 10 feet on each side. It might be up to 40 feet. Yeah, so the dog is going to get corrected for a while. We don't want that to happen, of course. But if you're training the dog and it's a situation of life or death, giving them the freedom to roam the yard, of course you would want him to learn that. And as the dog is more comfortable in there, you can lower that signal field.
Yeah. I mean, I have a grandmother who uses an invisible fence with her cat.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that.
I tried to tell her, you don't let cats outside, right? I mean, that's when I rescued my cats. That's one of the things are you going to let this cat outside? And if you say yes, then they don't even let you have the cat.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah, I didn't either. The first time we applied, because I started working at Petco, but I hadn't been there very long, we applied, and I saw that we had cat leashes for sale. So on the form, I wrote, only on a leash, thinking, well, that's good. And then I got rejected, and when I asked why, they said, we don't let you take the cat outside at all, even on a leash. It's just not healthy for the cat to have this desire to go outside. So I was trying to tell that to my grandmother, but she'd already, they'd already spent 6 or 8 months letting this cat go outside. And she said, well, the cat likes to go out every day, but she was worried because they moved to a place where they didn't have a fence. And she was worried that the cat was going to go on this road. And I don't know, somehow she heard about invisible fencing, and she bought one of those little collars like you would get for a Chihuahua.
Right.
And she put it on the cat. And, she's had the same success in terms of, if she forgets to change the battery, then the cat figures it out somehow and will wander off.
I think today, I'm not sure, because I'm using an old system. It's worked for me for years. But I think they maybe have rechargeable batteries where you put the collar in the charger every night and it charges.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah.
I started because I became a little neurotic about it, for lack of a better term. So I started checking it every week. I would just check it to make sure, because a red light comes on, at least on my collar, lets you know it's getting low, but it doesn't stay on all the time because it would burn that up then. So I just take the battery out real quick and check it, see where it's at. Check the battery level every week doing that.
Yeah, and I guess you could always treat it like a smoke detector or something, you change it every
so often.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting. She's had positive experiences with the invisible fence. I guess the poor cat, the first time it shocked the cat. She said it did a backflip or something. Was so upset.
Yeah.
But then she realized okay, I've got to turn the fence down a little. But
that's what I'm saying. That controls the signal field. They can also control the strength of the correction.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but then now the cat will go out and he just sits on the porch by her feet, and everybody's happy, and the cat kind of stays right around the house, which for cats is really good because they're so independent.
Impressive.
And
yeah.
They, it's hard to train a cat to do anything.
That people always say, and I do this. This leads to another topic: e-collars, which are similar to invisible fence collars, where you can correct. And I'm saying correct. That means shock the dog.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are very opinionated on this, and I usually don't address it, because I don't have a large enough forum, in the sense that if I go on Facebook and talk about this a little bit, people come in the middle of the conversation, or it's just not, I can't sit there and type all day.
You lack the context.
Yeah, exactly. But to go into a little depth here where we can talk about it, the e-collar is probably another one of my favorite dog training, life-changing devices, because like the invisible fence, it gives the dog total freedom to be able to be trusted off leash if trained properly. And the Husky, again, is one of the hardest breeds to train, and everywhere you read will say never take your Husky off leash. Probably if you're going to adopt a Husky, if you ever tell them you would take them off leash,
you're not getting the dog.
You're not getting the dog, because Huskies cannot be trusted off leash. But again, I like to say, WoofDriver rewriting the book on Huskies, my Huskies are almost always off leash. In fact, I don't like them being on leash because I don't want to reduce that pulling instinct in them. And to control them on leash, I would need to do that. But the e-collar, just like the invisible fence collar, you can correct the dog on command when you want to do it. And you can teach the dog how to behave and how to respect your voice and boundaries using an e-collar. And it's phenomenal, and it doesn't hurt the dog. Everybody thinks, or people that are not familiar with this think, well, that's so cruel. It's similar to the way an alpha dog or a mother dog would train the puppies or the young. It actually helps them learn. Like, they might grab it by the scruff. Well, around the neck is a region they would teach them, and from my understanding and my experience, it's never had any kind of lasting impact on the dog. If it's done properly, it perfectly trains them to respond the way you want them to.
Well, they also have, my understanding is they also have collars that spray citronella in the dog's nose.
Yes.
So you don't get the shock, but it's just that unpleasant, because the citronella is so strong.
It comes from the theory that if a dog, or you have a few dogs, they're doing something wrong, and you take, for instance, 2 trash can legs, and you snap them together real quick when they're doing it, and they hear that, it shocks them. Not literally, but the sound. Just like, whoa, what was that?
Startles them.
And you startles them. And you can use that as a training method too. But when I'm out in the field, and it's either life or death. If the dog doesn't come to you, there's something that's could happen to him. The shock collar is much more, the e-collar is much more reliable. Citronella I haven't used. I've read about that. I think that could be an effective training tool. I don't know enough about it. But also I have built into these collars a vibration and a tone alert. So you can almost page the dog. You can teach it to react differently when it hears a different tone or a succession of tones, as well as a vibration that doesn't actually shock them. It's just like kind of like your phone would vibrate on you if it was ringing. So these advanced collars have some of these features which can be really utilized. So people, if they're a little more concerned about shocking the dog, they can use these other methods, and if they don't work, the ultimate correction is the shock.
Well, and of course, Pavlov proved that you could train a dog with things like tones and
exactly,
a little vibration. Like if you start with the tone and then it goes to the vibration and then it comes to the shock, then your dog's going to start to recognize that pattern, and they're going to, okay, I got the tone, I got to back off, and if they don't, they get those vibrations, they're going to know, like, oh.
Yes, you can use it in that way too, exactly. And I knew a dog trainer once that said, all dogs communicate, it's all about the vibration. That's all how we talk and how they hear things and how they sense things.
Well, that's,
a lot of it's all the vibration. So
Beach Boys album Pet Sounds, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Good vibrations.
That's exactly right.
But that's interesting, and I guess it reminds me somewhat of at Guide Dogs of America, where I got Sammy. They train using the training collar, the metal chain that you kind of pull on, and it kind of like cinches around the dog's neck. It's not to choke the dog, but just it's that same startle thing that you were talking about.
Yes,
like it reminds the dog, like, okay, I'm doing something wrong, and if you really train them with that from the beginning, then they're not going to get to the point where they're getting choked, and they're not going to, have the issues that you have otherwise. And again, that's a matter of life and death, not just for the dog, but also for me.
Yes.
Because if the dog isn't listening to me, if I'm not in control of the dog and he's just carrying on, he could take me into traffic.
Right?
Yeah, I could fall down some stairs. I mean, there are a lot of things that could go wrong. He's like, oh, you're talking about correcting me. Don't fall down any stairs.
Don't do it, Dad.
Yeah, please don't pull my collar. But I don't have to use that on him very, very often, just because he is in control and we've developed that relationship. And I'm assuming it's like that with you and the Huskies, in the sense that you've developed this relationship and this bond with them in the training process, and so. Yeah, at this point, like, they know what you want, and you know what they like to do and what they want, and you can kind of read each other. Yeah,
they know what's expected of them with certain commands, and I give them leniency. I know every dog's got an individual personality, so I know how different ones are going to react, and I also try to read I can understand their body language.
Yeah.
But the what you were saying is so true that. Depending on the situation, once you train them, once they get shocked by the invisible fence or corrected, once they get corrected by an e-collar, they usually don't keep trying it. Huskies are a little more challenging in the sense that they will sometimes test it, not frequently, but I guess occasionally.
They're a little more rebellious.
Yes, so it needs to always be working. But some dogs will get invisible fence one time, get corrected, and never challenge it again in their life.
Yeah, I think if I had an invisible fence, I don't need one because I actually have an actual fence. But if I had an invisible fence, I think Sammy's the kind of dog that he would get that once and then he would just stay away. But when I was at guide dog school, I asked them, what other dogs have you used? You use Labradors now mostly. And they said, well, we like German Shepherds. We used to do Poodles because Poodles are hypoallergenic. So it's good for people who have dog allergies. But the trainer said, the Poodles were just too smart. Like you would pull the collar and correct the Poodle and it would look back at you like, I know where you sleep. Like, you'll pay for this later. And the Labrador looks back at you and, like, they got those sad eyes, like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do wrong. Please don't be mad.
That's funny, yeah.
And it's just, like, we think of Labradors as a very intelligent breed, and they are. But, Poodles being a little smarter, and sometimes, with intelligence comes that, a little bit more, not vindictiveness, but, a little bit... I don't know. Maybe that rebelliousness that we were talking about earlier kind of comes in there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You were talking about a fence, a physical fence,
Yeah.
physical barrier. And with a Husky, some breeds it's really challenging. That's why the invisible fence is a better choice, because Huskies, you at least should have a 9-foot physical barrier because they can climb it, jump it, or dig under it. So if you build a 9-foot wall, you still want something underneath it, some kind of barrier. Some people pour concrete. Some people take 6x6s and bury them into the ground because they will tunnel under or they'll make it over top. And I find that is pretty frequent practice with Huskies.
Well, and so then you're like building some kind of Bin Laden-esque compound.
You're building a fortress, essentially.
Yeah, and so I can see why the invisible fence in that situation. I mean, for property value, a 9-foot fence is crazy.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
even
real.
if you just put up the Trumpian steel slats.
Yeah.
You know, that's a
Well,
lot.
They say that with my Huskies, and this is the most incredible thing, and my only explanation is my Huskies have never challenged my physical fence because 3 of my Huskies, the current Huskies now, Zorro, Jag, and Chase, live in the physical barrier side of the fence, and that fence is only 5 feet tall. It does have a dig-proof barrier, but when we put it in, they were puppies, or we had planned to make a 9-foot barrier. But because I believe such an active lifestyle we live, and they're so used to being off leash that they don't even care to be out of the yard, because my yard's not huge; it's under an acre, and for them to not challenge that fence is beyond the scope of why. They just stay right around. Once in a while, they'll go near the fence. They'll look over. They'll see the neighbors, and it's kind of it's not even a slat wall. It's just screen, essentially. I mean, it's strong.
Yeah.
It can hold them, but it's a barrier basically because we have a pool, and by law you have to have some barrier in the Baltimore County region. But it's amazing, and I attribute it to that. They've never challenged it. The Princess, who was the dog that was on the invisible fence, and when I had my other dogs, Czar and Hudson, they were on the invisible fence, and their experience is great with that. I never thought a physical barrier would work with a Husky in the capacity that I have it. So that's just, I think, a real testament to what I do and how it helps them sow their wild oats, that the activity level's there for them, they've reached it, they're happy, and they're content being in their home when they're there.
Well, and you're fortunate in the sense that your businesses and the way your businesses function, you're able to still get out and go on these adventures and run these trails in a way that, you know, maybe somebody working like a 9-to-5 normal job might not have the ability to get out there and really do that. So they might need some of these other methods, like, they might not be able to go on a 15-mile dog run tonight.
Exactly. Well, when I first started with Czar, as I was explaining, I was had a more my job was more demanding, so
Okay.
I had more hours. And living where we live now on the East Coast of the United States, daylight savings time, as soon as in the winter at like 4:30 it gets dark, and I wasn't done work until 5:30. So that's where I would still take them out. I had to go at night because I felt like I had to get them some exercise. So I go at like 5:30. Time I get to the trail at 6:30, 7 o'clock. I'm on there for 2 hours because I had to get some miles in.
Yeah.
And that's where I started going at night, or going in the darkness at least. I had to do it because of the work schedule, but it worked.
And then that probably also exhausted you because you got to get back up at 7 o'clock the next morning to get ready for your 9 o'clock shift. And
Exactly. So that was quite demanding, but I knew if I didn't do that, those Huskies were not going to be happy.
Well, I mean, if you want to have walls in your home, you need to take the time, and I'm sure you're...
I found that out, literally.
Were you married at the time? Because I can see your wife being like, you need to take these things out.
Yeah, we weren't married. We were together. My wife now. So she's been with me through all the Huskies and seen the evolution of WoofDriver.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why she eventually agreed to marry you. Like, okay, the Huskies aren't going to eat our home.
She's like, he finally's got them under control.
He can train them. I can train him. Everything will be fine.
Yeah, all have our pecking order in life.
Yeah. Well, we know who the real alpha is.
There you go. And that's why I said Princess was the real alpha. The females, I'm not being chauvinistic here, but they flex some muscle and All the males seem to listen in the dog pack that I noticed.
Well, let's go to our producer Trisha to see if that is chauvinistic. Let's get a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Well, I was raised with 3 sisters, and I have more nieces than I do nephews, and my wife I have a stepdaughter, so I'm heavily influenced by the female gender. So in a good way. But
well, what other way is there to be influenced by females, Bill? Do you want to elaborate on that? Slay the patriarchy, I think, is what Bill's saying. Since we brought up Trisha, now's a good time because Trisha usually, brings questions that our listeners have had, things that they've tweeted at us or that they've emailed to us. And so I guess it's a good time to just remind people that if you want to send us any questions, you can email me at historian@presidentialpetmuseum.com. And you are director at presidentialpetmuseum.com?
I don't know, but I know I'm WoofDriver. I know I'm at Bill at WoofDriver.com. I don't know on the presidential side.
Bill at WoofDriver.com.
Yes.
Okay. So if you have questions, you can email them to us, and we'll be happy to address them on our next episode of the podcast. Tricia, do we have any questions from last week? Anything that came up that needs to be addressed?
I don't have any questions right now, so I really do encourage people to write in questions about your dogs, question about Bill, question about history, any of our topics. But I actually have a question because you mentioned Hudson. So where does Hudson fit in?
Hudson. Okay, so I got Czar. In case you didn't hear, Trisha is asking about Hudson. Maybe you never heard that name. That was my second Husky. So I got Czar, and I felt like I mastered the Husky. I got him on a regular exercise regiment, and I felt really good about what we were doing.
So you did one, and you thought, I'm an expert now.
Exactly. I became an internet warrior expert overnight. No, I spent about, I think it was a year with Czar, and I said to my wife, I think I'm ready for Czar to have a companion. I think it'd be a wonderful dynamic for him, and I would enjoy the extra company on our mini adventures we were doing back then, local bike trips. So she agreed to that, and I found another Husky, named him Hudson, and that was a learning experience in itself because, again, I had no idea. I just went ahead and got another male. For some reason, I said I could relate to females. Well, I thought my dogs, I needed some more manpower because I had so many females in my life. I needed a little male bonding. So I said, let me get another male. Czar was doing good. So that was probably a mistake at the time. Actually, you can make almost any sexes work together with dogs, but a female might have been a better fit. But actually, Hudson worked out perfectly after we got what I learned about alpha and the pecking order, what an alpha dog is, through Czar, because there were some confrontations. I had no idea. Again, I was green when I got Czar. I didn't know about the exercise and what a dog's requirement, or a Husky for that matter. And then I found out that you can't just put 2 dogs together. So, because I threw Hudson in the mix and I thought, everyone's going to live happily ever after, and I got schooled. Mm-hmm. You need to be very cautious and take your time when introducing dogs together, and understand that especially a breed like a Husky that's a pack-oriented dog, there is a pecking order. And if the owner or the what should be the alpha, as in us humans, I call it either the pack daddy or pack mama, whoever should be in control, the owner needs to be able to explain to the dogs assertive enough that you're not going to tolerate any bickering, one dog picking on another. It's sometimes hard to. That's where e-collars come into effect, and this is where I'm really adamant with people. If you want your dogs not to fight, you need to get an e-collar, because besides keeping them apart, or certain breeds and certain situations, personality-wise, you're going to have these confrontations unless you can flex enough muscle with an e-collar, establishing that hierarchy, you being the top dog, no pun intended, to make this relationship work out. And I didn't know that, so Hudson and Czar had a lot of battles, and there were some bloody ones. Luckily, none required a veterinarian care, but I mean, they were gruesome. And if you ever witness a dog fight, I'm not talking like terrible pit bull fights. I'm just talking about confrontations between dogs.
Yeah.
Huskies, they're not going to fight to the death, and most breeds won't, like a pit bull, because a pit bull will latch on and not let go until the other dog dies, basically. So these dogs aren't going to fight like that. They're going to do it enough to hurt the other dog, so the dog understands that I'm the alpha, you're not. I'm in charge, you're not. So there were some real bad fights. Czar established that he was the alpha, and I kind of broke him up and sat back. Breaking him up wasn't good enough. You need to be able to let them know this is not going to work out.
You have to prevent it.
You have to prevent it. Yeah, and you have to... This is going to sound, again, I can say this in this forum because I can explain it. We have the proper context and the proper time. But if you have two dogs that are going to confront each other, you might want to set them up to let them know. So I might want to put them in a situation where I know, and you can bait them, essentially. Sounds terrible, but you can put a little food down, and that will create the dynamic that one of those dogs is going to try to get the food. The other one, depending on the personality, will probably try to get it also, even though he might feel a little not as strong as the first one. And to create that situation is necessary so you can teach the dogs as they're going for it. Whoa, I'm calling the shots here. With an e-collar, what I'm trying to say here is with an e-collar, you could put the food there and tell them no and no, and tell them when they can eat the food, and they realize that, wait a minute, he's in control here, so we can't just willy-nilly and go grab this food, because they're going to fight over it if they go to do it, especially two strong-willed dogs. So I actually had that with Princess when I added her to the mix. Now I was educated, but when I learned about Czar and Hudson, and I went through all these dog fights, I thought that was just part of it. I met my dog trainer after I the reason I came about John, who is no longer here on the earth, he was one of the greatest gifts to me. He taught me everything I knew that Czar couldn't teach me about dogs. I wanted to get with John because I wanted to be able, these dogs, to have a more complete life. They were always, I had to keep them on leash or on tethered to the bike. I could never take them out and let them run free. Now, a lot of places you can't let them run free anyway, but even at a friend's house, I couldn't let them run free, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I just couldn't trust them off leash. So John was the guru. He was the master trainer. Someone had referred me to him. I'd been to a million other trainers, and they were not successful at me getting through to my Huskies.
Okay.
I learned about John, and it's all history from there. It worked out. He taught me everything I know. When I got Princess, now I finally was trained on how to control these dogs. Two dogs being in the same household with dominant personalities. Got Princess, another dominant. I figure now I'm going to add a female to the mix, not another male. That was fine and dandy, but she was the most dominant dog I've ever met in my life. So that was challenging in itself. But we set up that dynamic. It reminded me of that with the food situation, because they would all get into a big battle. And once you have a multi-dog fight, that is just, somebody's going to really get hurt.
You know, so much of this, I guess training must be universal in some aspects, because so much of this reminds me of guide dog school. I mean, we had to set up things. I know one of the, and it wasn't fun, and they told us it wouldn't be fun, but they had to do it so we could learn to correct the dogs properly. But
exactly.
There was
That's
a day,
what it is.
There was a day where they microwaved deli turkey, and then the guide dog trainer would offer it to my dog. My dog is supposed to stay in a sit, and this guy comes up and just like starts handing him like a microwaved deli turkey, where you can smell the turkey,
the aroma and
wafting off of it. I mean, you practically want to take a Thanksgiving nap just standing there. And the dog would start to go for it, and then you have to correct the dog.
He was salivating for it. He smelled the aroma.
Yeah, and then you would go, like, that was one station. Then you went to a place where there would be all these toys all over the floor, and you have to correct the dog if the dog doesn't listen to you. And it was just, you know, it was hard because you love the dog, and even though I'd only known the dog a few weeks, you're already developing this relationship, and you don't like to correct the dog. But again, you're building the situation where I have to rely on this dog. I have to know that if some guy's eating a hot dog on a park bench, he's not going to try and cross the street to go get that hot dog. You know, and
you know where else they train that, where it's so important? With police dogs.
Oh, yeah.
Because people try to poison them. especially if there's a big setup and they know the police are coming with dogs. They could pull something out, put it inside of a hot dog, give it to the dog. If the dog wasn't trained, dog would take it, and it could be fatal. It could be a tranquilizer, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's exactly right. It's the same principles because they work. You are setting the dog up to learn, because you can't, when you're trying to teach behaviors, you need a situation to be set up to get the dog to react, so when they're in the situation in the real world, they react appropriately.
Well, even as people, we only really learn if we fail first, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you got this dog, you got Czar, and you failed at a bunch of stuff. You ate a wall, and then you learned.
And many more things that I won't mention.
Yeah. So then you learned, okay, I have to do this, this, and this. And then you thought you mastered a Husky. You brought in another Husky. Then you learned what it was like to have two.
Yeah.
Then you brought in a girl, and you learned what that was like. And, that was another thing in guide dog school. They said a lot of times, like men will come to the school and they'll be like, I want a male dog because I need something butch and tough. Well, the female dogs actually end up being tougher.
That's what I was telling you. That's exactly right.
The male dogs are like the marshmallows, and the female dogs are the ones.
The females rule the roost.
Yeah.
I witness of that.
There's a lot of learning that goes on, and I think. We talked a little bit about this, I think, last week. We talked about, if you have plans in the future of getting a new pack member or things like that.
Well, one thing before we approach it, I wanted to touch on before I forget. You mentioned you felt bad because you were setting Sammy up to not eat the turkey. And I learned this from one of the greatest things I took from another dog trainer. Almost all the dog trainers I met, nobody really could deal with a Husky except for John, the guru. But the one trainer I worked with, I was talking and telling a similar situation. I feel bad doing this. She said the wisest thing I ever heard from someone. You're equating a human's emotions with a dog. Do you think a dog would feel bad? You're putting yourself in their dog's shoes, and you can't do that. And so many times I see so many people, I've done it myself, put ourselves, how does the dog feel? But usually the dog is not like a human where we reason things out and we're maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. They're usually yes or no. It's not usually, there's no gray area with a dog. So the putting the human or the emotional, our emotions into them and thinking how they're going to respond to a situation is really just a limitation of our thinking process. Our thinking process actually, I think, reduces our ability to properly train the dog in a lot of situations. We can't put the human emotion into it.
Well, it's so easy to anthropomorphize an animal. Like you see the dog like panting and he has his tongue hanging out of his mouth, and you just think like, oh, he's smiling, he looks happy. Because if you saw a person making that face, they would be happy. Although I don't know why their tongue would. But anyway,
right.
If we open our mouths, like, oh, it's happiness. If the dog opens his, it just means like, oh, he's tired or he's like sweating now. Like that's their ability to sweat.
Exactly.
And I think it's, especially when we start like putting clothes on dogs and doing all these other things, it becomes more tempting to think of them the way we would think of a child or the way we would think of other people, and that's not the most accurate view.
Exactly. Well, when we talk about losing Princess, and a lot of people have asked me, well, how do you think your other dogs are going to react now? And it's not that they're necessarily going to be sad, because again, our emotions, we think different than dogs.
Yeah.
They're more, a lot of times, concerned with their pecking order in the pack now, where they're going to fall into place, and how the dynamic changes. And it's not necessarily how they're going to think about it. It's just how they respond. Because again, there's not a lot of gray area with the dogs. This is what happens now. Boom. Instead of maybe I should try to be the top dog. They just either they're gonna try to be the top dog, or they're gonna respond a certain way, and that's gonna be until they're told differently.
You don't have a lot of dog Hamlets just sitting around like, oh, to be or not to be.
Yeah. People don't get it, and again, I'm guilty of it too. If my dog is, I got to think how Princess is thinking before. The medical procedures we were going to do or anything, and it's really not a fair way to think. It's the dog doesn't think like a human, and we mistakenly put our emotions there, and I think it handicaps our decision-making process for our dogs. You did touch on, am I going to get another dog? We were referring to that, and you asked me that question almost like a mind reader on our last podcast last week.
I was just thinking like, okay, your dogs are all getting older, and at a certain point, that there's the inevitable passage, the crossing of the Rainbow Bridge, as you put it. And so, my thought is, okay, Bill goes out and he does these adventures, and he's got 4 dogs, and that seems like, and like even numbers because we're people, like, it seems like, okay, if one of these dogs, if something happens, will you bring in a new dog? But then, hearing you talk about the pecking order and sort of that whole learning curve, and then also the training process, those are complicating factors in this. It's not like you can just go get a puppy and then tether the puppy to the bike and be like, let's roll.
They really are. And too many times, I think people, again, are a little misinformed or putting that emotion to it, like I said, and they say, oh, let me go out and get a dog. My dog needs a friend. You got to really carefully evaluate the situation, your lifestyle, how much time you can put into it, and what kind of dynamic that's going to create. I would like to get another dog at some point. I'm going to think about whether I might rescue a dog that's more of my dog's age possibly, or I might want to do a puppy for different reasons and different scenarios. I want to see what comes about. Sometimes I know people, because they know I'm the Husky guy, WoofDriver, occasionally will call me and say, hey, there's a Husky that needs a home. Actually, a real quick story, and I don't know if I ever told any of this, about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, an Alaskan police officer contacted me through the WoofDriver Facebook page.
Okay.
And they said, hey, you don't know me. I'm a police officer in Alaska. We've got a wonderful older Husky here who she had basically fallen in love with. And it's, I don't know if she said 10 or 12, because of its age, and this happens a lot more than you think, the family wanted to get rid of it because it was too old, and nobody wants to adopt it because it's not a puppy. So she's in such a small, remote area in Alaska, 500 miles from Anchorage, that all they don't really have a shelter. They just euthanize the dog.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, I hate to say this, and I can't even really say it without a little bit of emotion in my voice. They don't just euthanize them, they shoot them in the head. That's the way, because they don't have the services, the whatever, and I think she was the one that was designated to do that because she's a police officer. So she asked me, can I think of anything they could do? And I told her, and I don't want to advertise this, but if there was a financial way that I could help get that dog to somewhere that we could get someone to adopt, at least get it to a no-kill shelter, Husky rescue. They're more familiar with Huskies up there because they're a more common occurrence because of the working breed aspect and sled dogging and all that stuff. But she said, because I said, if we could get this dog to Pennsylvania, and I wasn't speaking for the rescue in Pennsylvania. I know someone might be listening to it now from there, but there's a place called Mapal, I think it's Mapal Rescue, that's a Husky rescue in Pennsylvania, and they'll take almost any Husky. So I would have called them and worked something out. But maybe a light bulb, and this is why Facebook can be really beneficial in communicating with people that we can communicate with all over the world pretty much freely. I lit a light bulb in her head. She contacted the Husky Rescue in Anchorage.
Okay.
And they said they would take it, and if we could get it there. So we were working on our way to get it there. She called one of the airlines, and they said they would fly it for free if we paid the taxes, which is $50. And she said, I can easily pay that. Said she was like the happiest girl in the world because they didn't have to put this Husky down. It was going to get another shot at love.
Yeah.
And she said it was such a great Husky. Now, that's the kind of dog that I would probably adopt right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a spot in my family for someone. I mean, listen, I'd have 100 of them if I could. But I can comfortably and safely handle 4 dogs. And I can get my dogs to work with almost any other dog. I just can't always count on the personality of the dog coming into the pack.
Yeah.
And if it's an older dog, it could be that, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, and I believe I can teach it almost anything, but there can always be a little bit of still, I guess, behaviors that are going to be instinctual, that are going to be hard to train out when it comes to getting along with the other dogs. So I would consider it long and hard, but that would be the situation that I would like to possibly help another Husky find a home.
Yeah, well, and I think that's great because then you're kind of getting around, like there are reputable and very good breeders out there, and I don't want to disparage that, but, there are so many people who are just doing it the wrong way, and it's hard to.
There are. I mean, whenever you can adopt, I would recommend it.
Yeah.
In my situation, before I knew it, I went to a breeder. Before I knew about it, anything with dogs, that's how I got Czar. But I kept on the line with the breeders because I started establishing a pack of dogs, and I had to know that I was going to be able to put a dog into that pack, that I was going to be able to, I guess, conform into it and be sure I was going to be able to train it. And a puppy was a safer bet for me without throwing the whole wolf pack off, basically.
Well,
at this point, though, I've become a seasoned veteran, I feel like I have more control over it. I could probably introduce an older dog that I'm not sure about the temperament with.
Yeah, well, and obviously you did that with Princess.
I did, and I learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah,
and then after Princess, I got puppies, and so I've been all over the gamut at this point.
Well,
introducing new young dogs to old dogs to young dogs, every dynamic you can think of.
Well, and regardless of how much experience you have or what you think you know, the new dog is always going to teach you something. There's always going to be a wrinkle.
Now, that's the truest thing I've ever heard you say, or maybe the smartest thing. Because, John, I'm going to call him the guru, he taught me, and all his experience, and he's probably had over 100 dogs in his lifetime, he taught me that every day you'll learn something new from your dogs. They'll surprise you every day. And I can't tell you how much I was surprised. And real quickly, talking about Princess, I was just out in the field with her. We were on an adventure within the past month, and she's always had a little dynamic with Chase. And I figured now she's chilled. I took my mind off of him for a second because I'm busy taking pictures, enjoying the scenery. Chase, I put him in a lay-down position. I call it a plots position. Had him and all the other dogs relaxed. Her, I don't require that of because it's harder for her to get up and down at her age. All of a sudden, take my eye off him, she gets on top of him because she wants to dominate him. The whole dynamic, what was going on there was she's getting older and she wants to show him, I'm still in charge. Don't even think about ever challenging me, because that would be the natural progression in a wolf pack. The younger dog would challenge the alpha dog and would take over when he injured her or him and showed him that I'm in charge, control now. So I had to I didn't want to correct her with electric. Here comes my emotions in it. So I actually went over and just grabbed her. I knew I'd be able to grab. Now, Chase could have taken her out any way he wanted to because he's so much more agile and younger than she is. I grabbed her. I grabbed Chase. I was taking her target away. I didn't want to grab her because I didn't want to hurt her. I grabbed him and pick him up. She's grabbing at his tail then. So as I'm lifting him up, she's still biting at his tail because she wants him. And I mean, this is on video, and this is what can happen. So I finally got her to subside. I was able to put him down. Once a dog starts a confrontation with another dog, it's really hard to stop it. Once it gets past a certain point, they get that almost taste of blood appetite in them, like a shark that smells blood. So I knew what I had to do. I always have the electric collar on. I had to give her a correction. So she kept coming up. I would tell her no, and I had to give her. Once I gave her correction, she realized, the pack daddy, WoofDriver's in the house. I can't do this anymore. And she left him alone. That's what it took. And nobody would understand that. They'd be like, oh, that's so cruel. She's a 15-year-old dog. I had to correct her with the electric. I had to say, you can't do that. And that's how headstrong she was. That's probably why she lived as long as she did, because she was so assertive and so determined. But that's the dynamic that takes place in a multi-husky household that can happen, especially. It's a little more, I think, possible or a little more probable in my situation because the dogs are in their element. They're out on these wild adventures. And when they're off leash, instinctually, they know that they could confront potential prey or a potential, there's not many predators, but a confrontation situation trying to get the prey with either their dogs in their wolf pack or other dogs.
Sure.
So they take on a different persona. That's a lack of not a good way of explaining. They're taking on a different personality, and I guess instinctually they are prepared to enforce and act upon natural instincts. So they are more likely to get out there and sow those wild oats and just act like a wild dog. So that's why the electric is so important. I mean, if we're inside a house or whatever, it's less likely. But when they're out there in the call of the wild environment, something can happen and they're ready for it. That's why, real quickly, it's real easy. my dogs, people, when I do this live broadcast, I'm always like, the dog keeps going to the bathroom. People are with me, and they're saying, why does your dog keep going to the bathroom? A lot of times they're marking areas, but it also makes them empty their insides naturally, instinctually, because they feel like they might confront prey or a potential confrontation with another dog or predator. It's just natural because they don't want to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of a confrontation.
Yeah,
that can be deadly to them.
It's like going to the movies. You always take a pee before you go
There you
sit
go.
down.
There you go.
Don't have to get up in the middle.
But that's where that instinct comes from. That's why it's easier to train a dog. Relatively easy to house train a dog. They get outside, they smell, hey, there could be something out here I'm interested in. I don't want to have to go to the bathroom. Boom, I'm going to go now. Instead of in the house where there's, more, man-made smells and scents, etc.
Yeah. Well, this has been quite
went
a
off on
wide-ranging.
a little bit of tangent there.
No, that's fine. This has been a wide-ranging conversation, but I think there's a lot of really great stuff in this, and we're going to keep this coming every week. And in fact, I think next week we're going to be focusing on a little different subject. We're going to be talking about our presidential pet museum.
That's great. I got my shirt on for it today.
Oh yeah.
So,
well,
we reversed roles. He's got the WoofDriver shirt on. I got the Presidential Pet Museum.
Yeah, well,
in case you're watching us, because by the way, we're recording these. Sometimes doing live Facebook broadcast, so you might be able to catch the video version of this too if you're not if you want to see that.
Yeah. So we're going to keep these coming, and next episode is presidential pets, and then coming up we're looking to maybe even bring in some guests, some special interview people, and we'll always have our producer Trisha there to keep us in line and give us your questions. So remember to email Bill at woofdriver.com or historian at presidentialpetmuseum.com with any questions you have. We'll address them on our next show after we get them, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, thanks. This has been the WoofDen, and we'll see you next week.